The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky, and today I am very excited to have Casey Brown joining us. Casey, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so Casey, for those who are not familiar with your work yet, they soon will be, but you are the president, founder of Boost Pricing, and at Boost, you help companies to discover their true pricing power, which we'll talk about what that even means. But really, the goal is help people to get paid very well for kind of the excellence that they provide, is I believe how you put it. And anyone in the world of consulting success, if they spend any kind of time in our community or they're a client or they've just kind of been around our podcast or any kind of content that we put out, they know that we love talking about pricing and pricing strategy. And you and I just spoke before we hit record. It's just such a powerful area that oftentimes people kind of ignore, or there's hesitation around adjusting pricing. But I mean, you and I both know it can have such a positive, powerful impact for a consulting business or really any kind of business. So I'm really excited for our conversation here today. And before we get into all the nitty gritty around pricing, and we'll make this very valuable for everyone, I'd love to kind of go back a little bit in time, because you started off as an engineer or have an engineering background. You actually have a patent under your name, I believe, for a lamp, or what's the patent all about?
I worked at GE Lighting, and so I worked on light bulb technology. And inside the light bulb design world, a light bulb is called a lamp. So I have a light bulb patent for a high intensity discharge light bulb.
Okay. And are you still collecting royalties from that, or?
No, I got a nice plaque and a little cash award, but the dollars all accrue to General Electric.
Yeah, I'm sure they had that contract tightly in place. Or yes. All right. So talk to me about engineering for a minute, and that having that background. Is there anything that you feel that your experience of being an engineer and doing engineering work kind of helps your thought process, or how you kind of apply that in terms of pricing and the work that you do today?
It's a great question. So I ended up in engineering kind of by accident. And by that, I mean, I was good at math and science and I didn't know what else to do. So I started as an engineer, and I love the technical and analytical aspects of it. I love spreadsheets. Excel is my jam. But I have a pretty big personality. I talk a lot. I live out loud. And so that was kind of a problem for the other engineers in my department. So I ended up kind of also by accident finding my way into Six Sigma at GE. And I was one of the early black belts and ended up doing rotation and pricing. And that's where I sort of fell in love and found like what I was really going to do with the rest of my career, which is exactly what I've done. But to more succinctly tie what I'm describing in my story to your question, the early part of my entrepreneurial journey, and so I was in pricing in corporate America for a decade and a half or something like that. But then when I started my own company, my game plan was to bring these technical and analytical solutions that I'd learned around elasticity calculation, segmentation analysis, detailed cost and mix and price analysis to my client base, which was going to be a smaller, medium-sized company. Ironically, and although I still love data and spreadsheets and in their role in informing our decision-making, what I've actually found is quite the opposite, which is the biggest reason companies and individuals who sell their services, like consultants, are not making more money with pricing isn't a better spreadsheet or a better understanding of the data. It's really the confidence or the fear that guides our decision making. In other words, you can have this most beautiful, most elaborate, most accurate spreadsheet in the world, but if you do not in your heart and mind believe you can, or you should, or that you're worth it, or you don't know what the customer is going to say, and you march around that spreadsheet and discount anyway. The analogy I've been leaning on a little bit lately for this is it's a little bit like giving the keys to your Ferrari to a toddler. Like, it's not important to have the very, very, very best mousetrap as much as it is to take whatever mousetrap you have, aka whatever pricing strategy you have, and execute it with confidence and with effectiveness.
Yeah, so it's funny when you kind of mention that analogy or image of the toddler and a Ferrari. My mind right away kind of went to, well, yeah, the toddler can't even reach the gas pedal. And so I've talked a lot about this idea of in pricing, and I'm very aligned with what you're talking about in terms of the mindset. And it's like the internal work that is typically the biggest challenge for people. Like, you can know what to do and how to set your fees. And like you have all the information, but at the end of the day, if your mindset, if something is holding you back and you can't, let's say, reach that pedal, you're not going to push the gas and you're not even going to move forward. So it doesn't matter that you have the keys. So I love that. Let's go back. So yeah, you were at G, then you were at AkzoNobel, and you were a pricing manager there. Mm-hmm. Some people may not even know what a pricing manager kind of is and what do they do, but of course, organizations, typically larger ones, have very specific kind of rules and functions where people are focusing on pricing. And you talk a little bit about some of the segmentation and price elasticity and all that, but just it'd be helpful, I think, if you could kind of paint a bit of a picture of what were you doing as a pricing manager and what does that kind of department or role look like?
Sure. Great question. And how I would describe what I did there is probably pretty different than what the sales team would describe. They used to have a joke. They called us the SPD, the sales prevention department, because we were inevitably at times in tension with the sales team. And that is also informs our focus specifically in arming the frontline sellers and pricers with better decision making and execution and confidence. But it is very common that those that are directly selling to the customers, which in large organizations means the sales force, and they're out there taking the arrows on behalf of the whole company, hearing every day, so-and-so down the street can do it for less, that there starts to be really a dip in the pricing confidence or a hit to that mindset as you described. And so it's very common for sales teams to have a belief that we're too expensive or that our attempt to prop up prices too high is hurting our volume. And there's truth in that in the sense that I give the sales teams a lot of credit. They're the closest to the customer. They know the feedback. But if you kind of think of a pendulum analogy, right? The sales team tends to want to discount too much. The CFO tends to want to cut discounting to zero. They look at that income statement and they see that we're not earning as much and they just want to make the sales guys the bad guys. And I think the right answer, the true answer is a bit more nuanced. It's somewhat in the middle. And I would describe my job as the pricing manager in corporate America as trying to navigate the competing goals sometimes with the end result being the highest number of most profitable sales possible. And it's very common to sort of get in this tug of war between volume and profit and volume and profit. And I believe that, and have seen a lot of examples of this, we can have high prices and high volume through very surgical application of good pricing strategies. It's not an either or choice. And I think that level of nuance is really the job of a pricing person inside of a company.
Right. And for a consultant who's working on building a pipeline of business and creating relationships with these larger organizations that, let's say, have a pricing kind of department or that function present, is there anything that they need to know about that department or people that are in charge of pricing? Like, do you, let's say back in the day when you're working at G or AkzoNobel and you're a pricing manager, do you have any direct influence or impact on, let's say, a consultant that's trying to win business inside of that organization? And if so, is there anything that a consultant or consulting firm, let's say more like a boutique, smaller firm, would need to keep in mind or should keep in mind if they see that an organization has that kind of pricing function?
Well, I think it's a great question. I do not believe there is anything specific about the pricing function per se that would differentiate it than other functional departments that have influence over a decision like that. But I will kind of pull up out of a question you didn't ask, because I think it gets really relevant to what you're getting at, which is how do you influence and win a sale inside an organization with a stakeholder group that could include pricing folks as well as other folks? I will draw broadly a line between two pieces of stakeholders. One is procurement, professional buyers, people whose job it is to negotiate down your fees, get more stuff for free, make advantageous terms and conditions for the company. And the other stakeholder group is everybody else. In other words, people that might, for some operational or functional reason, benefit from hiring you as a consultant. And your best allies always are those operational folks. I will share very quickly that when I was at AkzoNobel and we were buying some pricing software, I cared very much about the bells and whistles, the features, the utility, the ease of use, the graphical interface, all these features that were going to make this a really useful tool for us. But we were a part of a large corporation. We had a procurement department. They came in and tried to kind of hammer on the software vendor to get it for less. And really, I wouldn't say I was an advocate for the vendor per se, but in a certain regard, because the way that software would operate was so important to me, I was unwilling to sacrifice on that. And so in a sense, I went went to bat for the vendor with the procurement team. And I think that's not specific to pricing. You find the same thing in manufacturing or HR or IT or accounting, really anywhere you're trying to sell your services into where you're valuable, whether if it's managed HR services or, whatever function of the business, find the person or people who care very much that the output and the end result is really good. And those folks can be your biggest advocates.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I'm glad that you share that very important point. So let's fast forward a little bit now in your journey. I believe 2012, you started Boost Pricing, which is the company that you still run today. What was going on? What made you decide to leave the corporate world and, start your own thing?
Fairly long, tortured story. The short version is I had really gotten fed up with some aspects of large corporate environments that just didn't feel like it was the right fit for me anymore. And I'm not sorry at all that I started my career there. I learned a ton, invested a lot in my training and made some great relationships there, but I was really ready to get into a smaller business environment. And my older brother had actually taken the entrepreneurial leap a couple of years before I did. And I don't know if you certainly do, Michael, hang out with other entrepreneurs, but you know how people are once they start a business and it's working for them. They want everybody to join them. It's like a weird little cult. Like they just can't shut up about it. And that's how my brother was. And at first, the idea of starting my own business seemed really crazy and risky because I'm an engineer and I'm risk averse. And I had a good, solid, stable corporate job. Granted, I was frustrated and bored a little bit, but I got paid every 2 weeks. And I had 2 little girls and I was a single mom. And so the idea looked untenably risky for a while. But after a few years of this, it just took root and started to grow. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I finally just came to this conclusion that I had to try it. And if I failed, then I'd just go get a job I hated. And I already had one of those. So difference does it make, right? So I might as well give it a shot. And I thought I had a better chance at success than failure. And so I took the risk.
There we go. And here you are today. So talk to me a little bit more about that. You decided to make the leap to go off and start your own business, helping other organizations with pricing and kind of their pricing strategy. Where did your first few clients come from once you started the business?
Well, like a lot of early entrepreneurs, I wouldn't say this is a mistake because I sometimes feel like there's not much other choice. But I think once you're better established, you have the luxury of being able to say no to the kind of work that you should say no to. But early days, it's sort of like, if you are willing to give me a check to give you some advice, I am willing to come up with some advice. And so it was a smattering of different people from my network. I also did a little bit of subcontracting for another consulting firm just to kind of keep the plate full. And then relatively quickly, I started doing speaking. I started traveling around the country speaking for Vistage, which is a CEO peer group. That was really a big turning point in not only the volume of the folks that started working with us, but also the quality of quality and fit, I guess. I got smarter and choosier about what work I was really great at, and that helped clients be happier. And so then word of mouth kicked in. So first couple of years, painful, but I'm on year 12 this year, so it worked eventually.
And when you worked through kind of subcontracting for this other consulting firm, is that something that you'd recommend to others, or what was that experience like for you?
It has its pros and cons. I think it served a very important purpose because when I very first started my company, I didn't have a volume of business coming in the door to sustain the business and sustain my family and my financial requirements. And so in that sense, it was instrumental to getting me where I am. On the other hand, there were frustrating elements of it. I feel like in much the same way that it could be sometimes frustrating to be employee of a company, you are really essentially still an employee, but without some of the benefits of being an employee. In a sense, I felt that eventually, I think this was a maturation of my own business, but I was building someone else's brand and someone else's wealth and not my own. And so it served a purpose. It had its time and place. And then also, even though I was very scared to do it, at a certain point, I said, if I'm just going to work on this format forever, then I might as well go back and get a job and get some of the benefits that come along with that. So I made a kind of a cold turkey jump. I gave them some notice, but then I basically planned that I would have no revenue for 6 months while I really built the business. And I was ready for that. It happened faster, but I said at the end of 6 months, if I'm not getting enough revenue to sustain this business and my family, then I'm out. But it worked. It took some faith and some courage and confidence in my ability to generate that business.
We have quite a few people who reach out for help to build their consulting business. And in some cases, they're coming from subcontractor type relationships where you kind of wake up one day, realize, as you mentioned, like I'm building somebody else's business. I don't own the client relationship. Another big one is I'm not getting paid what I'm worth. Like I'm seeing that, I'm getting billed out at whatever, $300 an hour, but I'm only getting paid the equivalent of, let's say, $80 an hour or whatever it might be. I'm wondering for you as a pricing expert, was that an issue for you? And if so, were you able to navigate that or do anything about it? Or at that time, did you just kind of accept it? Because I'm guessing there was probably a gap between what you were getting billed out or what your work was kind of worth to the firm and then what you were actually being paid directly.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone who's dealing with that frustration, I commiserate with, because it certainly feels like you're giving the firm you're subcontracting to this giant chunk of the pie on your talent, on your experience, on your training and expertise. However, I think I saw it for what it was then, and I haven't really changed my opinion of it now. And I say that as somebody who now has a firm and we hire and use some subcontractors, that they don't have to acquire the client. They don't have to do any of the billing, any of the collections. They basically show up and work and get paid for every hour you work. Whereas when you have the selling effort and process, a lot of those never turn into any dollars. And so the way I saw that then is the way I see it, which is that was sharing of the pie because of the piece that they were doing for me that I couldn't do for myself, which is get enough clients. As soon as I was able to get enough clients, then I didn't want to share the pie anymore. Right. And so I would say that that's a journey I've seen a lot of consultants kind of go on. And I think I never really felt it was unfair. I didn't resent the firm. I think they were the ones able to secure all that business. I learned from it in a lot of ways. I got to be better at pricing. I get to be better at business. I got to be better at understanding, qualifying good clients and which clients I didn't want to work with. But it comes at a cost. It was fair to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like that both subcontracting and then your own kind of network and speaking were the main drivers in the early days of building kind of leads and the pipeline. Fast forward to today, here we are about 12 years or so later. What's working for you today? What's at the core of your company's lead generation, pipeline building? How are you creating opportunities and conversations for new business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a combination of things. And I'm finding it is evolving. And it's evolving for a couple of reasons. There's always external factors that are at play. In other words, I am in the pricing game at a time when inflation is going bananas and everybody's struggling to figure out how to manage pricing. So there are sometimes external factors that I didn't do anything to create that create some tailwind for us. But there are also, some of this is a maturity of business. In the first, let's say the first 5 years, I would say I got probably 3 or 4 clients based on a referral of another client. Like the word of mouth idea just took a long time to work in my business for some reason. I don't know if I was just doing a bad job of asking for referrals or I don't know why, but it took a long time. But now, after 10 plus years, a big chunk of our work comes from people that heard about me from someone else that worked with us or heard about me from someone that saw us speak. And so both the body of clients is large enough now that that's generating, it's almost like a flywheel that's kind of spinning on its own now, as well as the amount of speaking that I and then other members of my team have done to kind of get the word out about how to be more profitable through better pricing execution. So it's pretty common that we'll have someone, maybe reach out through the website. This is, hey, I saw Casey speak 6 years ago and it's been in my head ever since. And I think we're finally ready to engage. Can we have a conversation about what that looks like? So that's a bigger and bigger and bigger part. And I always hoped for that. It just took a little while to get going, like I said, but now it seems like it's really a big part of BD for us. The other is speaking still has a role to play. There's kind of 2 different levels of that. So early on, as I shared, I was going around doing talks for, could be a 15 or 20 person Vistage group. We still have a resource on our team that does that kind of speaking and he gets phenomenal scores and great feedback. And I am doing far less speaking, but trying to get on bigger stages. So I'm keynoting some big conferences, 500, 1,000, 1,500 people. So I do fewer speaking events, but from a scale perspective, reaching bigger audiences. And so that both of those kind of levels or layers are generating business for us.
And when you talk about these larger stages that you are getting on and delivering a keynote, is that you are being engaged by, let's say, one client to give a talk to a bunch of their own kind of employees and team members? Or is it that you are, speaking, let's say, at a conference or some kind of event where the people in the audience are made up of many different business owners, or what's the makeup of that?
We do both. And we internally look at those as very different. In other words, one of those is a business development opportunity and one is a delivered service. So we charge for both of those. So when I'm keynoting, I'm speaking of the latter. So it's a trade association, 350 CEOs together that all make high technology, industrial automation devices, whatever. Well, it could be anything. And so I do keynote speaking, large groups for business development specifically, and to reach huge audience for our message. Our other resource that does the speaking and the workshops, Doug, he does smaller BD, like a Vistage type opportunity, but then we also do training and workshops inside companies for their sales team or for their customer facing commercial team. And so that is one of the services that we provide.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Do you view the pricing on those differently? Meaning that if you are, let's say, delivering a talk to a room that's full of potential ideal clients for you, would you charge less or the same or more compared to if you were delivering a talk to people that may not actually be your ideal clients, but they've brought you in because they want to learn from you? So how do you approach the pricing of those two things?
I think it's a great question. And so I'm going to restate those two chunks just a little bit differently. One is this is an engagement that can lead to many more engagements, or this is an engagement that is likely to lead to no more or maybe one more, but it is not in and of itself a business development investment. And so I've had a little bit of an evolution on this. And some of that is, again, sort of the business getting up to a level of success where I don't necessarily want to be on the road like I used to be. So I have a keynote fee that is much more substantial than strictly the strategy question that you asked would indicate, because I'm still trading my time for money and I'm still getting on a plane. And in the old days, I used to get on 20 or 30 planes a month. And now I want to get on maybe 10 planes a year for work. And so I use price as a sort of a metering or a throttling device to keep my keynote speaking. And I'm also qualifying the keynote opportunities in other ways. That said, that's where I am now. That's less a question of pricing strategy and more Casey Brown living her life and not wanting to be away from her kids and her family. From a strictly pricing perspective, from a strategic perspective, and especially as I look back a few years to when this was a more necessary business development effort, absolutely the size and quality meaning in terms of fit to our target audience, size and quality of the audience would be a big factor in my willingness to do that at a lesser fee. The one caveat or the one thing I'd have your listeners think about, though, if they're kind of translating that to their own world and saying, I can get X, which is not great, but at least it gives me access. That is true if it's necessary. But it's often not necessary to discount to get speaking engagements. And in fact, there is a role to play of price communicating the quality of you as a speaker. In other words, you pay somebody $25,000 to do a keynote versus you pay somebody $500. Your assumption is that the $25,000 keynoter at a level of professionalism, quality, engagement, effectiveness is much, much higher. So we can communicate the value with the pricing. And in speaking, because it's very subjective, it's very difficult to objectively quantify the value of a speaker. It's a creative pursuit to a certain degree. So sending the message that I am a high quality, highly desirable speaker, I think is important when you set your fees. And so while I would be willing to do certain events for less because the audience, I never jump to that ever. And I think that it's too common that people do. And there's some ways around that. You can say things like, my standard fee is X for a keynote, but I wouldn't want fee to be the reason we don't work together. What does your budget allow? So you can signal a little flexibility, but just jumping straight to the, groveling phase, including I will speak for free. And I've done it. I'm not looking down my nose at it, but it's too often and for too long that people accept less than they're worth in a speaking environment because simply because it's a BD. I've gotten some exceedingly wonderful fees speaking in front of 1,000 of my very best clients.
Mm-hmm. There we go. I appreciate that perspective. I'm also wondering, when you talked about the number of referrals or business that comes in as a result of referrals. And I think the example that you mentioned is somebody that may have seen you speak 6 years ago and then decides to reach out today. How much of that do you think is supported and kind of amplified through the content that you publish? I know you have a blog and you send out a newsletter and things like that. But do you believe that the referrals or that kind of business that is coming in that is from a referral or from somebody may see you speaking a while back, has that been kind of carried over through maybe other activities like being active on social channels or sending you a newsletter or a blog? Or how do you kind of view that, the role of content?
I'm about to share a very vulnerably embarrassing truth, which is that I have produced, outside of the stuff I've done with and for clients and with and for audiences, I've produced almost no content, blog, social media for the better part of the past decade. Very, very, very little, which one could argue I've done it the hard way. Instead of writing from my desk, I've hopped on more planes than I needed to build this brand. And I was just a little bit late to the marketing game, the social media game. I would write blogs, but I kind of dreaded writing them. And so I wouldn't write them. And it's really only been, so I'm going to say, one LinkedIn post a year was probably fairly common for me. I mean, very, very infrequently. But this year, I've started in January a very specific, intentional strategy. Part of it is about helping to build the brand and the company, but also as I get more established in this game at this point I have a lot to share. And I want to get the message out, not just to people that will pay us, but also for people that can benefit from it. And so this year is a very intentional strategy around writing a lot more newsletter posts, making a lot more videos, sharing a lot more content out in social media environments with the idea that certainly some of those folks are going to give us a call, but a bunch more of them are struggling to be paid what they're really worth for the excellence they provide. And that's unjust and it fires me up. And so I want to get this content out to the world.
So here you are, right, 12 years into the business, knowing what you know now. If you were talking to somebody who, let's say, is maybe 5 or 6 years into building their business and maybe was doing similar things to you, meaning not that active on social channels, not publishing a lot of articles or putting a lot of content, would you do things differently knowing what you know now?
Well, since I've only been doing it for less than 2 months, it's a little hard for me to say how valuable this will be in terms of some of that BD work. There are certainly some people who have found us who wouldn't have otherwise, or people that said, oh, I saw your email pop up in my inbox and it reminded me, I've been thinking about calling you for the past 6 months. And so it's triggering some top of mindness, if you will, for sure. But I would also caution, and I don't mean to be pessimistic about the role of marketing. I think it's important. But I also think when you're a very small business, whether it's solopreneur, just a handful of resources, there are a lot of competing elements for your time. And for your dollars. And so if I were to go back and give 5 years ago me some advice, it would be to establish a regular cadence, but I wouldn't be spending the kind of time on it that I'm spending now. I think that a mechanism of cultivating and then giving back to your audience, the people that give you permission to say, hey, I want to hear from you. It would have been time well spent to have done some of that. But I think that my belief has always been like, just throw yourself into the work and the business will come. And that's largely been true. And maybe I've done it the hard way. But I think, and especially very early on, people are very busy on strategies to acquire business and they're not kind of getting their hands dirty enough. And sometimes that's the best way to get people to go with you. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like part of the success that you had in those early days came from finding ways to get in front of your ideal clients. So whether that was like at an event speaking, Vistage, whatever it was, that's where oftentimes people struggle. They'll spend so much time like thinking about content or just thinking or planning or like preparing, but they're not actually getting in front of a client. And so whether you're getting in front of somebody through your content, if you're able to do that and you're committed to it and you do a good job of it, that could potentially work as well. But speaking can work too, as you've just shown. And I mean, there's many ways to accomplish this. The main thing is that you're getting in front of the people that you want to add value for. I want to also ask you, Casey, I think it was around during COVID and maybe 2021, you joined forces with another firm to help sales organizations. And from what I can see, that lasted for, a year and a half or so. And I'm wondering if you could share kind of like any experiences from that in terms of what worked, what maybe didn't work. You're able to kind of give us some insight to, because I think oftentimes people are looking for different ways to grow. They have opportunities to collaborate with different companies, whether that is a client of theirs or somebody else. And so anything you kind of share about what that experience was like and why you've kind of shifted away from it or back to just focusing on pricing.
Absolutely. I hope you'll indulge me first, though, in going back and saying one more thing about our prior topic, if that's okay, because I feel like it's really compelled to do it.
Yeah, of course.
Which is, I love your connecting the dots between things like content marketing on LinkedIn and me speaking, that those are in essence the same thing, in a way of investing time and effort, getting in front of the people you want to get in front of and sharing knowledge for free or for low price with the idea that they will say, oh my gosh, that person's an expert. I want to work with them. And so I think in that sense, I was doing content marketing very heavily all along, but in a very face-to-face way rather than putting it out on social media. But there was another thing you said that I thought was really important is the kind of the never-ending loop of perseverating on trying to create content and trying to get good at, saying it the right way. Or when you said that, all the neurons in my brain lit up because I thought, oh my gosh, I remember very specifically in 2012 when I was booked to give a talk. It was going to be my first workshop event, and I had 6 months to work on it, and then I had 4 months to work on it, and then I had 2 months. And pretty soon, and I am not proud to admit this, but it was 3 days before and I hadn't started. And I caffeine fueled, insane, don't ever repeat this again kind of cycle. I pumped out a half a day workshop, design, content, slides, what I was going to say in 3 days, and delivered it 3 days later. Now, if I were to go back, it's not on film, thankfully, but I'm sure I would cringe at some of the things I did and said. But the value of that was the advice I had gotten to book a talk. Was a mentor of mine said, burn the boat. Like if you truly want to get out of subcontracting for someone else, you have to put a stake in the sand and say, as of this date, I'm doing this. And so he said, and it was a Vistage chair, and he said, I'll book you for my groups if you want to. And I said, sure. And this was at Christmas time. I had 6 whole months to figure this out. And if I had waited until I was ready, I would still not have made 10 years later, wouldn't have done a single talk. And I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So I think sometimes like commit even when you don't know how you're going to get it figured out. Trust that you know more than the audience. Stay this far ahead of them and get out there and start doing, not perfecting forever because you'll never get out of the lab.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Anyone in the consulting success community has heard me talk about imperfect action, how that's just such a core part of how we operate, that the good things happen when you take action, not when you just think about them. And I think that's essentially what I'm hearing you say as well. So
absolutely.
I appreciate that. All right.
Okay. So back to the merger and then the unmerger. So it was lifespan was closer to 3 years because it started as a joint venture between our firms that was very successful and fun. And then we started fully operating together about a year into that. And we were merged for just barely under 2 years. And like every other twist and turn in my professional career, I wouldn't take it back because of what I learned from it. And there were things I loved about it. And then there were obviously reasons we ended up unwinding it.
In case, sorry, just to, I apologize for interrupting, but just to provide a bit of context for people who may not understand kind of what's going on. So this was partnering, kind of collaborating, and then merging with another company. So your focus has always been pricing strategy. This is a company that was really focused more on sales. Is that how you describe it?
Yes, sales training, sales execution, sales transformation. Absolutely. And the reasons it made sense to us to merge, one is that we had both been originally solopreneurs for a long time, but then we both did have small teams by the time we merged, but there's a certain loneliness in entrepreneurship. And so the idea of being lonely at the top, it was exciting, the idea of collaborating. But from a synergistic perspective, pricing and sales are hand in glove. The kind of companies that we help, our target market was the same kind of companies. And you heard me talk about this a little bit at the beginning, my focus in pricing is less around numbers and strategy and more around mindset and belief and psychology and execution. And she had a very similar take to other aspects of selling that are limited by mindset. So there was a lot of natural overlap in that way. And sort of fast forward into the middle of the business, it was working in the sense that clients that had historically been mine, we're now doing sales training and hiring and transformation with, and vice versa. Some of her historical clients now we're doing pricing work with. Our brand new clients, we were sort of schmirgling it together and offering both services at once. And it was very effective with the clients. What didn't work very well and what eventually sort of unwound it is that we added a bunch of cost. So we hired some people we wanted to sort of scale up our systems and our processes, and the number of people that would take to execute at this certain level we wanted to execute added a lot of overhead cost. And there weren't very many at all cost synergies or economies of scale of being one company. There were a few administrative things and a couple of software packages, but largely it was incrementally significantly more expensive for us to run that business. And so that just put a really big burden on the selling side of the business. We had to constantly be selling to feed the overhead machine. And at a certain point, it just got a little bit less fun. I love to sell, but it's not all I want to do. For the reasons I described earlier, I have a lot of desire to share this message with entrepreneurs around the world. I like to get my hands dirty with clients, and I have this company to run and a team to run. And so just being on the sort of hamster wheel of selling all the time to feed the overhead, it wasn't worth it. And so we took a little while to face into that because we were still trying to make it work for a while. But eventually it was sort of like we were both having more fun and making more money before we sort of overcomplicated our lives. And so rather than struggle along with that for X more years, it was like, I'm a big believer in this as in sales and in everything else. Fail fast. If you're going to find out something doesn't work, don't be embarrassed to say it doesn't work and pivot quickly, because now we're already unwound, operating as two separate companies, back to making money, back to simple, nimble operations. And certainly in my case, at least, a heck of a lot more fun.
Did you consider, or was there any discussion for this idea of let's merge, let's just send each other business, like let's just refer business to each other? Like, did you ever consider going that path? And I'm wondering, if so, why not do that? And why did you actually decide to merge? What was kind of going on?
Yeah, we talked about that for a decade and barely ever did that. And I don't know, I think there's a gajillion consultants out there, right? And I know a bunch of them and a bunch of them know me. And I have these sort of loose, or in some cases, somewhat more formal kind of referral relationships with consultants. But of the work that comes to us by referral or recommendation of someone else, I would say less than 5% is from another consultant. I have great relationships with other consultants, but including with my former partner, when we were pre-merger, we kept saying, gosh, we got to find a way to collaborate more and get some of our clients working together. And I don't know. I think I'm not certain why that doesn't work better. And I say that even now with some of those referral partner kind of relationships I have. I think everybody's very busy growing and managing and developing their own business. And it's nobody else's job but mine to manage my business. And so I think with intention, but without any oomph behind it, we didn't accomplish it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that experience, because I think it provides some perspective, or at least some points for people to consider who might be looking at something similar, or just to know in advance. So I thank you again for sharing that, Casey. Before we wrap up, I have a couple of just other quick kind of rapid fire questions for you. And I want to make sure, we've like literally just scratched at the surface of pricing. There's no way that's going to happen in one podcast. And so we will make sure that people can learn more about you and everything that you have going on at your company as a resource for them. Before we do that though, I'm wondering, everything that you have going on, as you said, you have a small team, you're working with clients, you have your kids, traveling less than you were before, but are there one or two things that you do on a daily basis that you find are just really critical to showing up, being, your kind of best self and being able to perform at high levels with focus and concentration and productivity?
Yeah. The most important is sleep. I have got to get good sleep. And I went all of my 20s and most of my 30s barely getting 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes.
Wow. What was going on? Are you just out partying or what? What?
And especially once I started the business, I was working the very early years, working 80 or 100 hours a week with babies at home that were still not sleeping through the night. So some of that's like, if I look back at the math, I was probably earning about minimum wage the first couple of years I had this business. Yeah. But finally I figured out how to do this a little more profitably. So number one is sleep. And some of this is just age. I think the older I get, the more valuable and important that is to my cognitive function. But, all the research supports it's essential for our health, turning short-term memory into long-term memory, all those things. So if I get good sleep, I am better. And I also am pretty consistent with a meditation practice that I've been doing I was on and off about it for a long time, but for the past year and a half or so, I've been very consistent with that. And I think that is very helpful for the right kind of mindset for anything comes my way during the day.
Any specific type of meditation? You mentioned a specific kind of practice, or the same one you've been?
I've studied different ones. So I've studied Vipassana, I've studied Transcendental Meditation, but I actually work with a mindfulness coach. It's brandless. It's somewhat vanilla, but rooted in a lot of the same kind of traditions, but really just stillness and being very present to the present moment.
So for someone who's saying, listening, joining us right now, going like, that's fantastic that you're doing that. You're doing meditation, you're taking care of yourself, you're sleeping, but how do you fit all that in when you're running a business and you're busy and you have kids? So for you, is there a certain time of day that you tend to do meditation, or how do you make sure that you get it?
First thing, yeah. I'm not sitting for an hour a day. There's people that do that. I maybe aspire to that when I'm retired or something, but sometimes it's 10 or 15 minutes. And if I've got things starting at 7 a.m. with having to run this daughter to school then I'm setting the alarm to get up at 6:30 and give myself 15 minutes. And then I pour a cup of coffee and off I go. I do have one piece of professional advice that allows everything to fit in. And some of this is the privilege of having been in business for more than 10 years speaking. So it's easy to understand this advice, hard to do it early on, but the more specific I have gotten about what I'm good at, and the more specific I've gotten about who I'm best able to help, I think that makes it easier for the right people to find you. It's easier to charge more for that work to those fewer clients. So consultants, we're famously trading our time for money. Whether you're doing an hourly rate or a fixed fee or any other way, you're pouring your time in and getting money out. And so the more specific, the more clear, the more crystal clear and narrow that you are about where you're best, then I think you can make great money and not work till a jillion hours. At least that's been my experience. And I talk about this being this specific, not just pricing, but pricing execution with sales teams. That's the blue part of my flame. And when we stay in the blue part of our flame, we make a lot of money. We don't work insane hours and we delight our clients. And as soon as we stray outside that, then one or more of those things starts to fall apart.
Well said. All right. Before we wrap up, then, one question I love asking is, in the last 6 months or so, Casey, is there a book that you have read or listened to, can be fiction or nonfiction, just anything that you've really enjoyed that you think others might enjoy as well?
I've got my stack of books behind me. Oh, yeah. Chris Voss, and it was a reread, but the Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference.
Yeah.
From a pricing strategy perspective, I would describe or advise slightly different maybe than that book does in some detail. But I think that it's a great book for examining self-limiting beliefs that might crop in the way for negotiation. So I'm always looking at that kind of stuff because I think mindset's so critical in predicting our success. So yeah, that's the one I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, that's come up before. That's a great book. Thanks for mentioning that. And then finally, before we wrap up here, Casey, I want to make sure everybody can learn more about you, what you have going on at Boost Pricing. Is it boostpricing.com? Is that the home of where we should send people?
That's right. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. My handle is Casey Brown Boost. And I'm, as I shared lately, very active there. So you can find me there posting just about every day of the week. And then we've got newsletters on the website, but also you can reach out and contact us if you have a question on the website.
All right. We'll have all that linked up in the show notes. Casey, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.